Join us now on Flickr at flickr.com/groups/art-of-photography.
Welcome to the Art of Photography. I'm Ted Forbes. I get a lot of questions on the Flickr forums, people asking about lenses, and that's a topic that people want to see covered here. And I get a lot of questions, everything, what are the differences between lenses? What do the numbers mean? What's the difference between an inexpensive lens and what are you paying for on the higher end, the more expensive lenses? And I started researching what I was going to talk about today, and I realized that this is a very wide subject. Lenses are arguably one of the most important pieces of equipment in your equipment chain. They're going to have the most effect on the image, on the final picture, and they're also very difficult to design by manufacturers physically. And so there's a lot that goes into a lens, and there's a lot of things I want to talk about. So this is going to be kind of part one of a multi-part series. But today I want to give you kind of a basic overview of lenses and what some of these things are and what they mean. Now there are two basic classifications for lenses, okay? In my right hand I have what's known as a prime lens, and in my left hand I have what's known as a zoom lens. Now here's the difference. The prime lenses have fixed focal lengths, okay? And if you are kind of fuzzy about focal length, if you go back to the very first episode we did on the camera obscura, I talk about focal length and give you an example, and so you can see illustrated how that works. But basically focal length is measured in millimeters. And the longer the focal length, the more telephoto lens you're going to have, and the smaller the focal length, the wider the angle you're going to have. So for instance, if I'm shooting concert photography, something like that, and I'm in the back and I want to be able to project and really get in tight on the musicians on the stage, I want to use a telephoto length lens. If you're shooting sports, sometimes you can't get real close to the action. You need to be able to appear that you're closer, so you use a telephoto to do that. And telephotos, remember, have longer focal lengths. Okay? Consequently, on the other end, you have, if let's say you're doing landscapes or architectural work and you're in a building and you can only move so far back before you hit a wall, you want a wide angle to be able to capture all that information onto the final picture. And in the middle you have your standard kind of focal length, and on a 35mm camera, which both of these lenses go to, that would be around the 50mm range. Okay? So a lot of times you see advertised the standard focal length for a 35mm camera is 50mm. Now I do hear a common mistake a lot on the internet and all kinds of places where people assume that that's still the case. And the camera they own is a consumer level digital camera. And what they don't understand is the digital sensor is actually smaller than the space that a piece of 35, one photo of 35mm film would take up. Okay, so you have what's called a crop factor. Okay, now don't get this confused with resolution, because digital cameras still maintain a very good resolution, and it is just a different beast than film. But that is one of the main differences there, is you tend to have a crop factor. So 50mm, and your sensor's smaller than a 35mm negative would be, then it's actually going, what looks like a 50mm on a 35mm picture is actually going to be more of a zoom portrait kind of length in the 75 to 80mm range when you consider your crop factor. Okay, so anyway, we'll cover that a little more in another episode. But prime lenses are fixed focal lengths. Okay, so if I want to get closer, I have to walk closer. If I need to get further back, I got to walk further back. The lens in my left hand is a zoom lens, and this has a variable focal length. Okay, and zoom lenses come in different varieties. Some of them actually have you just simply turn to affect the zoom. This one is a push-pull. Okay, so this one covers a range of 35mm all the way up to 105mm. Now a zoom lens is particularly useful if you're kind of doing street photography or any kind of event photography, things like that, where let's say you're shooting a wedding or something and you have no idea, you're kind of going to have to improvise with the moment. Okay, so you're going to go shoot guests and the bride and the groom, and you don't know what people are going to do. You're trying to blend into the background so people don't notice you, and you're going to get very candid, off-the-cuff shots. Well, that's where a zoom lens is going to be your friend, because sometimes you only have a second or two to get the shot, and sometimes less time than that, and that's not enough time to reach into your bag, grab a different focal length, twist it on, get set, and get ready and shoot. The moment's gone by that time. So a zoom lens is really going to be your friend in that situation. Now you may be thinking to yourself, well, why don't I just use a zoom lens all the time? Well, there are some basic differences between the two lenses, and I'll go into these very briefly. Typically, and if you go back to episode 7 where we talk about aperture, On a prime lens, you're going to they're easier to engineer for wider apertures. So if you need a shallower depth of field, or you just simply need more light, you're shooting at dusk or something like that, and I just need more light in the lens, I would go for a prime lens. They're going to be able to do that better for me. Whereas you can see this is actually a 55 millimeter lens, and the maximum aperture on here is 1.2. And so that's pretty wide. It's very wide, actually. And the maximum aperture on my zoom lens is 3.5, and actually that setting does change depending on what your focal length is. So that would be a reason to choose primes if you don't need the convenience of the zoom lens. Primes are obviously better to go for. Now, when lenses are designed and when lenses are manufactured, if you also, back in the first episode, we talked in the Camera Obscura about the technique you're using. Basically what you're doing is you're taking light, which would be your scene, and you're projecting that via the lens in a process called refraction, meaning you're moving the light through glass to bend it, and you're going to put that in focus and put it back onto the focal plane, which would either be a piece of film in a film camera or a sensor in a digital camera. Okay, so that's basically how that works. And because you are using a piece of glass to manipulate that light via refraction to go back onto the focal plane, you start to get little imperfections in things, okay? Now, we're going to talk about elements in future podcasts and what two different brands or types of the exact same brand of lens, what the difference would be in those. But basically, you're just going to start to get all these little imperfections, and these include things like spherical aberration, chromatic aberration, things like that. And the two that I want to talk about today that are the most common that you're going to get would be barrel and pin cushion. Okay, so barrel is pretty easy, barrel distortion. And if you have ever seen fisheye photos, that's like a primary example of barrel distortion. As the wider the angle you have, you're going to have to correct for this in the lens design. And you know, fisheye lenses tend to be back like in the 8mm, 6mm range, so they're really short focal lengths, so they're very wide angle lenses. And you can see that sometimes fisheyes, the photo is actually circular and it has this real swirl to it, and you can see in the middle it's very puffy and sticks out. So if you see a portrait of somebody taken with a fisheye, their face looks very distorted. The features in the front tend to look bulgier and stand out than the rest. Now the opposite of this is with telephoto lenses, and especially cheaper ones, you're going to have the pincushion effect, where it's the opposite. It's going to bulge out on the sides and barrel into the middle. Now these things can be sort of corrected, and that's where lens design comes into play, and the mathematical corrections and calculations that the manufacturers do to design a lens that will not have these distortions. So you can imagine right off the bat that the difference between, you know, a $100 lens and a $4,000 lens, there's going to be a lot of correction for barrel and pincushion distortions within that. And you're going to also have these on prime lenses too, but there's a little more going on because you're making a lens that's going to cover a range of focal lengths. So zoom lenses, you know, either way, you're going to have to spend a lot of money to get a really good lens in general. But we'll talk about that some more in future podcasts and things like that. But those are the basic two types of lenses, some distortions that you have involved. We're going to talk about this some more in the future, like I said. So anyway, this has been The Art of Photography. Thanks for watching.